What is good, everyone? Welcome to the channel. My name is Paul. I make videos about Japanese society, life, and culture from the viewpoint of a long-term foreign resident. I've been in Japan for 20 years, and today I'm going to be discussing the issue that apparently Japanese people, and Japanese young people in particular, are not interested in politics, and why that is. This is actually in response to a question on my video from last week, where a viewer asked, why do Japanese young people seem to be completely disinterested in politics? Don't discuss it, don't get into it. And that question struck me because I've been asked this many times by exchange students in my university classes. There are a couple classes that I teach where I have quite a number of exchange students in the course, and they ask me the same thing, like, why do none of my Japanese classmates or friends want to discuss politics at all? What's going on there? And so that is what I'm going to respond to today. Now, what this should let you know is that I do pay attention to my comment section. I read all the comments. I respond to probably 95% of the comments, and it's because they're really interesting. There are a lot of really intelligent people who are watching my channel. YouTube tells me that 20% of the people who watch are actually in Japan. So there are a number of Japanese people and long-term foreigners like myself who comment below. So there's some really good discussions that go on down there. So I invite you to join in. So if you have opinions about politics in Japan or why Japanese people are uninterested, please feel free to comment. Now, I'm going to get into 4 reasons as to why young Japanese in particular are not interested in politics. 2 of those are social reasons, and 2 of them are physical reasons. And then I'm going to talk a little bit at the very end of the video about how protests and demonstrations go in Japan. Are they common, uncommon? Is it a strange thing that you don't see very often? Or is it actually common in Japan? Now, before I get into all that, I want to say if you want to support the channel, please hit the like button if you get value from this video. Please share it or any of my other content with people who you think might be interested. And please subscribe if you haven't already. I do have a Patreon. I'm on Instagram. All those things will be linked below, including my link for Sakura-ko, which is the artisan Japanese snack box company. If you want to get a curated box of goodies to your door every month, then please sign up. If you use my link and my code Exjapter, you'll get $5 off your first order. And so all of those are ways to support the channel. Now, let's get into the reasons why Japanese, especially young Japanese, are not engaged politically. The first 2 reasons are social. The first social reason is actually related to the topic I talked about last week, which was courtesy and conscientiousness of Japanese people. And speaking of which, I'm coming up on a group of kindergartners, and I'm going to stop videoing for just a moment. I'm not going to videotape the kids. When I spoke about courtesy and conscientiousness last week, I brought up the issue that Japanese avoid conflict. They avoid things that are going to create contention with other people, make others feel uncomfortable, that sort of thing. So, what is a great example of something that can make people uncomfortable or become confrontational? Politics. So that means that Japanese people in general, especially young Japanese, don't want to talk about politics. It's just not something that comes up between friends. It's not something that families talk about over dinner. Basically, politics is kind of avoided as a taboo subject because it can create, or rather, it can disturb the peace and harmony between people who are hanging out together. That's why university students aren't having political discussions. There's no equivalent in Japan of the uncle and the brother-in-law getting into a big knockdown fight over Thanksgiving dinner based on who's a Democrat and who's a Republican or whatever. So it's just an avoided topic of discussion. And therefore, if you're not talking about it, you're not discussing it, it's not something you're going to be really engaged with in your mind. It's not something you're thinking about as a result. So yeah, that's a very strong social reason. People just don't talk politics because they want to avoid conflict. The second social reason why Japanese, especially young Japanese, are not interested in politics is they're not really taught to discuss the issues and discuss politics in the education system. The education system, by and large, is teaching them facts, history, They'll teach them like the political system, how it was formed, like it's a parliamentary system, and the prime minister does this, and the diet does this, and this is how the elections work. And so they'll get like the history, how it works, information about the system, etc. But they're not going to have discussions about the issues or the controversies and those sorts of things. Most of the students who show up at my university have done plenty of writing in their high school courses. It'll be the facts and figures and history of some topic or another. But they haven't been asked to take a stand and then defend that stance about a particular issue. I see this overwhelmingly in my writing classes because one of the hardest things for me to teach in my university classes is how to construct a proper thesis statement for writing. Essentially, a thesis statement is a claim that you're making about something that you can then proceed to prove with facts and evidence to back up your claim. And the lesson where I teach thesis statements is quite difficult for the students. Basically, I go over what the thesis statement is, what it isn't. I give them examples of good thesis statements and bad thesis statements. And then I give them some topics just to practice making their own claim, their own thesis statement about. They don't have to write a whole paper. They're just literally writing only the thesis statement. And the first examples I get are generally pretty bad. You can tell they're bringing up a topic clearly, but they haven't graduated from the manner of talking about something factually to making a claim about said something. So basically, I get a lot of, it's clear what they're talking about, but not why they're talking about it or what their actual stance on it is. And so it takes a little bit of work and practice for them to get the understanding of how a thesis statement works and how to make a claim and back it up. So if you're not talking about it socially with your friends and family, if you're not taught how to critically engage with ideas and government issues in the education system, it doesn't leave you a lot of room to be a particularly politically engaged person. Now, of course, I'm generalizing because I do have very politically minded students, but they just add to my understanding of this being an issue because they'll often complain to me that they have to come and talk politics with someone like me, a foreign teacher, because if they want to bring up any kind of political issue, their classmates are completely uninterested or just so uninformed about the particular issues that they, couldn't say anything about the topic to begin with, much less have an opinion about it. So, yeah, the politically minded students do exist, but they are a minority and they definitely feel isolated amongst their classmates for it. Now, there's two physical reasons that compound this lack of political interest in Japanese. The first is how voting works in Japan. When you become eligible to vote in Japan is at the age of 18, and you have to be a citizen. But you could only vote in the township of which you are a official resident. You are registered at that city hall as a resident of the town. And if you're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, you're probably in university. And you're probably at a university that's not your hometown. So that means you would have to physically take the time, the effort, the expense of transportation to return to your hometown in order to vote. And there aren't any mail-in ballots in Japan. They exist for Japanese living overseas, and when I double-checked my information on this, I discovered from a 2021 NHK article, and I am quoting now, mail ballot eligibility is limited to people with severe disabilities who have a physical disability certificate or war injury and disease notebook, and people who are classified as nursing care level 5 under long-term care insurance. So that means university students are often not going to be able to vote because they don't bother to change their official registration to the city where their university is. So to vote, they would have to go back home. which could be halfway across the country. Now, the second physical reason why Japanese are not politically engaged is demographics, plain and simple. Japan is famously dropping in population. However, large metropolitan areas like Tokyo, Yokohama, Osaka, and some others are growing in population. And that's because that's where the young people move. That's where they go to have their families and have their careers, because the jobs and career choices are more varied. It's a more convenient place to live than out in the countryside. And so what you've got concentrations of young people in the major metropolitan areas, and the countryside is filled with the elderly and aging. So if you have 10 million young people vote in Tokyo in a national election, well, that's only counting for the Tokyo area. It's going to be easily counteracted by all of those countryside prefectures out in the rural parts of Japan. The elderly people, because of this, hold a lot of electoral power, because, well, you have how the system is weighted, and if you have all the young people in just a few places, they're going to feel like their vote doesn't count for much, because, quite frankly, it ends up not counting for very much, unfortunately. Now, it's such a cynical thing to say, like, oh, my vote doesn't count, I can vote, nothing really changes. But amongst all Japanese, even older Japanese, that cynical thinking is actually really common. Japan takes that cynical thinking to a completely new level. So many Japanese I know who do vote do so with a kind of like, yeah, I voted, but I mean, nothing's going to change. There's a very overwhelming feeling by a lot of Japanese people that political engagement doesn't do much good because nothing's going to change anyways. And we got to remember, this is a country where the ruling party has ruled basically since the 60s without a break, except for a short break around 2009, 2010, when another party took power for a little bit. But then, the earthquake happened, Fukushima happened, and they kind of got snowballed and pushed aside, and the Liberal Democratic Party, or the Jiminto, retook the reins of the country. And yeah, it's not a lot of feeling that change comes about through politics in Japan. The politicians are going to keep doing their thing. And finally, the media doesn't take a very critical approach to Japanese politics. They will jump all over a political scandal involving individuals. They will jump all over, the prime minister improperly spent money on this, or this minister has a, sexual assault accusation, or, there's different things that the media will jump on. But in terms of government policy, it's mostly reported on like it's taught in schools. It's just factual. This is what the government did. This is what the government voted on. They will cover like arguments in parliament. They'll show like, the opposition vehemently opposing something that the majority party is putting in place, but they don't have the pundits and the commentators weigh in on the issues like they do on American television. So that's very, very different. Which leads me to the final thing I wanted to talk about, which is protests and demonstrations in Japan. Japan has a very well-deserved reputation as being a very civil and calm and peaceful society. I mean, a society where people don't talk about politics because it can be contentious. However, you would be wrong to think that demonstrations and protests don't happen. Even historically speaking, if you read Rebels, Outlaws, and Outcasts, or is it Rebels, Outcasts, and Outlaws? There's a textbook that I read a few years ago that's really fascinating, and it just goes over all the times that the peasants and farmers and ordinary people revolted and protested against the various governments in Japan's history, usually over taxes, usually over lack of food, lack of resources, and that sort of thing. So Japan has not historically been just a calm and peaceful country where people never get out of line and demonstrate. Japan famously had huge university student demonstrations in the 60s, just like many places around the world, especially University of Tokyo and Nihon University students basically demonstrated and rioted, and there was violence, and police had to do a really violent crackdown. And yeah, that's not so long ago that happened. It feels a little bit unreal that would happen with today's university students, but it does if something reaches a certain critical mass or that the media is bothering to cover. So for example, when the Black Lives Matters protests and demonstrations were going on worldwide, they happened in Japan too. And young people did go out and join those demonstrations, even in Japan, where you might think they wouldn't care so much, or they're too pacifist to go out and actually demonstrate, but they did. Back to the media. The media is often going to just kind of ignore demonstrations and protests. I bet you didn't know that this week, as the first week of March 2025, there was a protest of about 1,000 people outside the Ministry of Finance. If you just watched regular news on TV, you wouldn't know this happened. You would have to be following certain accounts on social media or YouTube to have learned about it. I learned about it through YouTube, and I was like, wait, there's a big demonstration outside of the Ministry of Finance? How come I haven't seen any word of this on the news? And it's because there was none. I had to look up some articles, and it's people, upset about taxes and financial burden, Ministry of Finance policies. Unfortunately, the details are very scant. The details are not, they're not being well reported on. So I cobbled together what happened reading a couple of blogs and watching a couple YouTube videos. But if you watch the mainstream media, you wouldn't know that demonstration had even happened. And 1,000 people it's not huge, but it's not insignificant. So yeah, demonstrations, protests do happen in Japan more than you might think. Woo. That side of the road is not safe to walk on because there's just no space at all. And they don't give any kind of pedestrian crossing walk there, so I don't know how else I'm supposed to get over to the sidewalk here. At any rate, that's the video for this week. I want to thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got something out of it. Remember, like, subscribe, share if that's your thing, if you think this video is worth it. And I'm very happy that you came along on the walk with me today, and I hope to see you next time. Peace.